It's my pleasure to bat leadoff at this year's Jerry Malloy. It's an exciting time for people who are interested in the Negro Leagues. A great deal has happened in a relatively brief time. Let's work backwards for a few minutes. Last week, as was widely reported in the media, Major League Baseball announced that it was formally adopting the statistics of more than 2,300 Negro League players from 1920 to 1948 into the official Major League Baseball record. These new stats have some dramatic consequences. Josh Gibson, for example, is now Major League Baseball's all-time leader in batting average and slugging percentage and holds the all-time single-season records in both of these categories. These new stats have also initiated some good, important conversations about the past, and there might be some people in this room who contributed to making that happen. Last month, the Baseball Hall of Fame's new exhibit, just around the corner, Souls of the Game, opened, and some of you have already seen it, and I've just walked through it. I'm looking forward to going through it more closely. According to the Hall, from the decades-long history of Black baseball prior to the formation of the Negro Leagues, through the complexity of baseball's reintegration to challenges that remain today, the Souls of the Game will reveal a deep connection between baseball and Black America. That strikes me as a noble, valuable initiative. Again, some people in this room, especially if Leslie were here, contributed to making that happen. In conjunction with the exhibition, on Memorial Day weekend, when I was at the North American Society for Sport History conference, the Baseball Hall of Fame honored Black baseball's past by hosting what was called the they called it the East-West Classic, a tribute to the Negro League's All-Star Game. And the game was sponsored by Boeing and featured many former major leaguers, including, there you go. That's good. Including Prince Fielder, Curtis Granderson, Ryan Howard, Adam Jones, B.J. Upton, and many others. And I wish I could have attended it. Maybe some of you did. In the last several years, two old, decrepit ballparks where Negro League teams played and have undergone significant renovations. This is or was Hamtramck Stadium, which is in Hamtramck, Michigan, a multicultural Muslim majority city of 28,000 people, 5 miles north of Comerica Park. Some of us were there last year. Thanks to the efforts of local activists, baseball historian Gary Gillette. I don't know if Gary, you're in the room. And then you are? Yeah. All right. Oh, see. Sure. Shout out. And a nonprofit he helped organize. The ballpark and grounds were granted a historic designation by the State Historic Preservation Office and recently underwent a significant $2.6 million renovation. It looks great and is being put to good use by a variety of teams. And in Paterson, New Jersey, Hinchcliffe Stadium, an Art Deco style oval-shaped facility built in 1932, was reopened last year as part of a massive $105 million urban renewal project, funded mostly with state tax credits. One reporter summed up the effort like this: local leaders hope that Hinchcliffe can do for Paterson what Camden Yards did for Baltimore, turn blight into beauty through baseball. And I plan to visit it this summer. And last year, Sam Pollard's The League, an energetic, well-crafted celebratory documentary, was released to critical acclaim. Some of you, there were some people I think who were going to be here who were in it, and I highly recommend it. And as many of you well know, 4 years ago was the 100th anniversary of Rube Foster's Negro National League. And as a result, there were numerous centennial commemorations. This probably was my favorite, Kadir Nelson's New Yorker cover. I could and will catalog some more examples, but these are but some of the highlights. Clearly, we're living amid a Negro League renaissance, a rebirth, a revival of, a renewed interest in long gone baseball games and Black ball players, most of whom are no longer with us. In fact, this Negro League renaissance has been happening for many years, and I suspect that we're somewhere near its pinnacle. And truth be told, I thought the same thing in 2006 when the Baseball Hall of Fame inducted 17 individuals, one of whom was Effa Manley. from the Negro Leagues in the preceding era of Black baseball, which was an unprecedented number of inductees for 1 year. And it was a long time coming and took years of hard work. Today, I briefly want to talk about that renaissance and then initiate a conversation about its sources, contours, and meanings. That conversation, I hope, will take place over the course of the conference and perhaps beyond it. For many years, I've been fascinated by the myriad ways the Negro baseball leagues have been remembered and represented. Remembered and represented by whom, you might be wondering? By baseball fans, sports writers, academic historians, museum curators, antiquarians, history buffs, by literary and visual artists, and all manner of people who produce different forms of media and popular culture. By Major League Baseball teams, by sports apparel companies, among others. In the 1970s, when my interest in baseball was emerging, I was unaware of the Negro Leagues, which had been defunct for close to a generation. And by the 1980s, I had a dim, hazy sense that segregated baseball leagues existed before Jackie Robinson and Larry Doby reintegrated Major League Baseball in 1947. Robinson and Doby played in those leagues after all, Robinson briefly with Kansas City Monarchs and Doby for the Newark Eagles. But it was not until the 1990s, when I was a graduate student at the University of Iowa, that I ran across an article that stoked my interest in this subject. I was doing research on the 1919 World Series game fixing scandal and stumbled across this article in a 1992 issue of the Maryland Historical Magazine. In the article, Bob Loeffler mentions the team that preceded the Elite Giants, the Baltimore Black Sox. And that phrase, the Black Sox, was ensnared in my pre-Google internet search. Trying to stay focused on the Black Sox scandal, I set Loeffler's article aside for another day. Years later, I finished my Black Sox work and several other projects, and eventually came back to the Negro Leagues. And in many ways, and for a long time, I've been thinking about the Negro Leagues in much the same way I conceptualized my Black Sox scandal project. That is, I see the Negro Leagues as a site and an opportunity to reflect on the production of cultural meaning, to ruminate on collective remembrance and the politics of representation. To understand the Negro League baseball renaissance, we first need to spend some time considering what the Negro Leagues were in the first place. And if this were a different, less knowledgeable audience, I would explain that African-American baseball has a long, rich history. That, for instance, professional leagues comprised exclusively of teams with Black players were not always necessary, because professional baseball in this country was not always segregated. In the 19th century, there were all Black baseball teams like the Philadelphia Orions and the Cuban Giants, yet nearly 100 African Americans competed with and against white professional players. The most famous among them include Bud Fowler, George Stubbe, and Sovie, and Moses Fleetwood Walker. As we all know, living in a separate but unequal society, African Americans interested in baseball responded to segregation in the same way that others responded to other forms of racial exclusion. They created and promoted their own institutions, in this case, baseball teams and leagues. Now, many historians have pointed out that the Negro Leagues quickly became an institution central to African-American life. Besides being among the largest Black businesses in the United States before the breakdown of segregation, the Negro Leagues, argues historian Don Rogozin, were woven firmly into the fabric of the Black experience. This is Rogozin. He writes, "The importance of the Negro Leagues transcended the world of sport. A small group of Black men gifted with remarkable skills reached far above the menial and the mundane. In the process, they became worldly, and some became wise. Scuffling to make a living playing the game that they loved, these men became symbols of competence and achievement for all Black people. Because they provided joy and excitement in their often dramatic quest for victories and Negro League pennants, they enriched life in Black America. When their baseball victories came against white opponents, which they often did, they undermined segregation itself. The Negro Leagues also employed hundreds of people, poured thousands of dollars back into the African-American communities, and contributed to the formation of those communities' identities. The Negro Leagues, as you well know, they thrived until 1947, when Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey broke Major League's racist gentleman's agreement. Larry Doby followed closely on Robinson's heels, playing for the Cleveland Indians just 11 weeks after Robinson's debut. For the Negro Leagues, the results, they were predictable, right? And fatal. The best young African-American players signed with white major league teams, and attendance at Negro League games declined dramatically. The Negro National League folded after the 1948 season. The Negro American League held on until 1960. A few African-American teams continued to play during the 60s, but the quality of their play deteriorated, their fan base eroded, and eventually they too disbanded. By the time Jackie Robinson retired from baseball in 1957, the Negro Leagues were declining rapidly. A few years later, they no longer existed except in memory. The Negro Leagues were obviously more complex than this overview, but it provides some historical context to better understand how many years after the leagues no longer existed, they've been resurrected in many different forms. And to be candid, I don't know precisely when to date or where to locate the Negro League baseball renaissance. My sense is that by the 60s and into the early 70s, few people, that is few white people, knew much about the Negro Leagues. That ignorance surely had many sources. Some people, of course, like me, were too young to have firsthand knowledge of the Negro Leagues, and the subject was not often mentioned in the media or in schools. Some people old enough to know were inattentive to or disinterested in baseball, like my mother, black and white. Perhaps still others chose not to know or to remember the Negro Leagues being an embarrassing, shameful reminder of the pervasiveness of American apartheid. Perhaps the 1970s publication, I meant to mention this. This was just a couple of days ago. This is a really strong article that was in the Washington Post about the fight for the meaning and the memory of Jackie Robinson. It's hard to know where to date this renaissance, as I was suggesting, but you might want to start with the 1970 publication of Robert Peterson's Only the Ball Was White, which is an important turning point in knowledge about an interest in Black baseball. He writes, Negro baseball was at once heroic and tawdry, a gladsome thing and a blot on America's conscience. When this appraisal was first made, every team in the major leagues had been integrated for at least 10 years. And as Peterson notes, Negro baseball had been virtually forgotten. At the time, Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson had neither been inducted into this hall, and nor had they been transformed into national icons. And there was a general ignorance, even among most sports fans and scholars, about the Negro Leagues. For approximately the last 30 years, the Negro Leagues have enjoyed a steady historical revival. They've been the subject of numerous popular and oral histories, newspaper and magazine articles, theses and dissertations, museum and photographic exhibits, autobiographies and memoirs, novels like these, and plays, documentaries, a feature film, HBO Soul the Game, Negro League replica baseball jerseys and caps. You can buy them on the street here. And retrospective baseball cards have become popular collectibles. For a time, surviving Negro League players frequently made appearances and signed autographs at baseball card shows. The Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri, I assume some of you have been there, opened in 1990 and is dedicated to preserving and illuminating the history of Black baseball in America. Since 1971, there has been a very active Negro Leagues committee of the Society for American Baseball Research. This is it. There are several websites and podcasts devoted to the Negro Leagues. At least 15 major league teams have hosted Negro League nights in which teams play Negro League replica uniforms. One of the best indications that the Negro Leagues have earned mainstream American respect and legitimacy occurred in 1996, when General Mills issued a special edition Wheaties box honoring Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, and James Gould Papa Bell. Another was in 2010, when the U.S. Postal Service issued a set of stamps commemorating the Negro Leagues. They were created by the painter and illustrator Kadir Nelson, whose book, We Are the Ship, is as brilliant as it is beautiful. In addition to hosting Negro League nights, which seem to be popular with many fans, some major league teams have permanent displays in their ballparks dedicated to the Negro Leagues. In Detroit, where we were last year, since 2007, in Comerica Park's exterior, there's a bronze plaque honoring Norman Turkey Stearns, a Hall of Fame outfielder who played with the Stars, among other teams. In Washington, D.C., at Nationals Park, there's a statue of Josh Gibson. It was commissioned by the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, sculpted by Omri Amrani, and unveiled by members of the Gibson family in 2009. And in Baltimore, I'm an Orioles fan, at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, there's a mural designed by local artist Ernest Shaw, and the mural pays homage to some of the city's iconic Negro leaguers. Collectively, these and many other cultural texts suggest that more people may be aware of, knowledgeable about, and interested in the Negro Leagues today than when the leagues existed, right? The texts and events I've mentioned raise a variety of difficult questions. What explains the ongoing wave of interest in the Negro Leagues? How and by whom have the Negro Leagues and the ball players associated with them been remembered and represented? What ideologies or whose interests do these remembrances and representations advance, reinforce, or challenge? And what does it mean that the Negro Leagues have become a popular subject and commodity at this particular historical and cultural moment? These are not rhetorical questions. I'd like us to consider them, talk about them, share ideas about them in just a few minutes. So that's what I'm trying to discern, trying to figure out what we think about this cornucopia of Negro League expression. What's it all about? What does it mean that there's been this outpouring of Negro League activity and commemoration? Much of it, we should note, produced by powerful and entrenched institutions, Major League Baseball teams and their corporate and media partners, which in the past contributed to the very racial segregation that they now seem to be subtly, implicitly criticizing. What do all these texts tell us about remembrance and representation? Do they suggest an earnest change of heart, a significant cultural shift in terms of learning about and appreciating African-American history and improving race relations? Is it a public form of historical truth and reconciliation on the road to racial repentance and redemption? Is it somehow related to contemporary diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? That is, institutional attempts to acknowledge, accept, embrace, and support people from all racial, sexual, gender, religious, and socioeconomic backgrounds. To be cynical for a moment, something I try to avoid, as cynicism is toxic, is much of the Negro League reminiscence insincere public relations and savvy marketing? It often seems like a way to commercialize and profit from Black men who were denied the opportunity to play baseball in the most profitable leagues at the time. On the other hand, these texts do tell us something about the past for sure, something worthwhile, but perhaps even more important, they seem to be about the present and how some people imagine or think or feel about the past. What inspires and motivates the stories people tell? Or put differently, what inspires and motivates some people to tell the stories they tell? That's what I'm hoping to talk about with and learn from you. Thank you.
Well done.
We have 10 minutes for questions. So I do wonder. So I was trying to think about like, oh, sorry. I was trying to think about, trying again to pinpoint when did it happen. Part of me wonders if Ted Williams in Hall of Fame induction speech, where he completely shamed the Hall because Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige weren't in there, people probably heard that and went, who are they?
Yeah.
And maybe that started some people digging.
That's
and that was 66. Okay.
That's a good moment.
So
that does seem like a kind of inflection point. I mean, he had a lot of media attention on him at the time. I think for a lot of people that came out, left field, right? And I do think it helped spur some interest. Like, what's he talking about?
Like, who are they?
Yeah, and that's that's exactly why we do this.
Right. Who has questions? Yes.
So I want to point something out, Dan, that we've all done who know about this stadium. The stadium is Hinch Lift, not Hinch Cliff.
Is that?
We all put a C in it.
Did I say it wrong?
Just a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah?
The director there said she did it too.
Okay. I'm happy.
And it's worth going to. It's a beautiful stadium. They have a little museum. I'm not sure if they've actually have regular hours yet, but you can definitely see it.
Did you go to a game there?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay. Because there's an independent team, at least last summer, there was an independent team that was their home stadium.
Right.
So
Right.
New Jersey Jackals,
Right.
they are still playing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Is that other questions? Yes.
Dan, I was wondering if you would consider the George Floyd murder in 2020 as sort of another impetus. MLB right afterwards incorporated the stat, or just announced they were going
Right.
to include Negro League stats. So there was this enormous attention now of the black experience, black pride. So I'm wondering.
No, I think that's exactly the kind of thing we're talking about. When we're talking about the past, which is, gone, it's a temporal dimension. We don't have access to it except through texts, broadly defined. But when we're talking about the past, we're doing it from the present. And so the present informs how we think about the past. And that historical moment, which was, dramatic, scary, violent, shameful, right? Help, I think, people think a little bit differently about all kinds of past, including the sporting past. So sure, of course, that makes total sense to me, that institutions like Major League Baseball, maybe the Baseball Hall of Fame, they're separate institutions. Maybe that helped shape their thinking, their feeling about how to represent, pay attention to, honor the past. So sure, that makes total sense to me. Yeah, that's a good point. Gary?
So just a couple of points of information. I was at Hinchcliffe yesterday. You're good company saying at Hinchcliffe, because I believe Larry Goby Jr. said that in the short film. If it wasn't him, it was somebody else in the film at Hinchcliffe Stadium. The museum there is open during Jackals games and an hour before Jackals games. So it's not just by appointment. So if you're going to go, you can see the museum and see a Jackals game. And the third thing, if I could say something about Hamtramck Stadium.
Please do.
In addition to the renovation you talked about, we have another $2 million plus being done this year. Construction will start soon, which will include bathrooms, thank God, and more porta potties, and changing rooms, and first aid, security, a scoreboard, a PA system, regrading the outfield and resodding the outfield. So next year we'll be able to really ramp up stuff. And finally, if you're interested in Dan's presentation, I did a piece for Baseball Reference a couple of years ago called The Historiography of the Negro Baseball Leagues, which if you want to track it in books, that's where to go.
Right.
I'm working on a film and TV show adjunct to that now.
Great, thank you very much. I mean, that's the thing you're saying about Hamtramck Stadium is important because it's an ongoing process, right? Just because you build the stadium, it doesn't end there. This renaissance is ongoing. It doesn't seem to have any lack of fuel, right? There seems to be, and I'm trying to figure out why is it that so many people are now interested in this subject, whereas during the time, of course, most white people weren't terribly interested in the Negro Leagues. And immediately thereafter, there was a period where there wasn't much interest in it. But since maybe, I don't know, the 70s, it's a post-civil rights reemergence of interest in this subject. Yeah, hold on, Gary, go ahead.
I can think of multiple dates. At least I had a good one. In 1970 is a good one. There's another one. 1994 marked the publication of the SABR Negro Leagues book and James Riley's Biographical Encyclopedia of the Negro Baseball Leagues. And those two books were indispensable. And that, to me, sparked really the renaissance of scholarship. Even Peterson's book did as well, but it was mostly oral histories by the OGs like Riley and John Holway and Don Robeson and a few others. But the 94 publication of those two books really accelerated things.
Yeah.
And then you bring in Ken Burns baseball with
Right.
Buck O'Neill
Buck
just
did a lot.
stealing the entire documentary, which everyone was like, oh yeah, we'll listen to him read the phone book.
Yeah.
But there's a hand way in the
Yeah,
back
go ahead.
and they might have changed their mind. Oh, no, there you go.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your idea.
Oh, that's okay.
You've stolen a couple of good ideas. Ted
We-
Williams, Ken Burns.
We're sharing.
I'd also mention, I saw a play just yesterday on Tony Stone.
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah.
Who played with the Indianapolis Clowns. If you
Yeah.
get a chance to see it in the community, I recommend it, especially if you, now most people in this room know an awful lot about the subject, but even if you don't, it is a very eye-opening
Right.
presentation to watch.
Yeah. Is there somebody else here too? Yeah.
I think another big moment was when MLB retired Jackie Robinson's number.
Right.
And I think that was a very significant event because, you know, they were trying to make amends, you know, trying to make up for, you know, some horrible things that have been done in the past. And I think that was very significant. And I also think a couple years ago when they pulled the All-Star game from Atlanta,
Right.
when you're talking about equal rights and you talk about voting and stuff like that, I think that all ties in.
Lisa, some of
I
you
didn't
know,
mean to say that.
she's
Well, I
written a
did mean to
chapter.
say that out loud, but I did. When you said like you're trying to make amends, my response was, "Are they though?" She's Major League Baseball. Like,
She's written a chapter on this in
Yeah.
her book.
every Jackie Robinson Day is
Small gesture.
way more of them patting themselves on the back for stuff they didn't do
Right.
than it is actually our bad. We screwed this up. Sorry, that wasn't the word I would have used, but we're gonna keep it.
PG-13. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a complicated issue. This country does dual things. So even right now with the announcement this week of the added stats and Josh Gibson, there's people just.
Oh, the comments have been nasty in some
Yeah.
places.
But the whole point is exposure and information, that's what history is. And the point isn't argue Josh Gibson versus Ted Williams or whatever. The point is when you see a list of great hitters or pitchers and you see all the names, that you suddenly can think about greatness and about people who played the game of their time. It's about exposure. When I was walking through yesterday to the flag thing, I was, you know, kids, you know, they were interested in this. They wanted to know where the Negro League players were. You know, 10, 11, but they knew their stuff. Man. I thought baseball was dying, but these kids knew, you know, the history, but they wanted to know more about these names. I mean, games like Stratomatic, create Negro League, you can buy a baseball game in the shop right now. It's got Negro League players in it.
This statistic thing is a pretty big deal. Yeah, it's really changed the way I mean, think about the amount of attention it's gotten and the conversations that it's sparking among people of all ages. Some of them aren't friendly or kind, but that's in itself revealing too, isn't it? I mean, that tells you something about the culture.
So it's always that balance of, but in the end, the exposure and history, you move forward with information and truth.
Right.
And some people can reject, but over time, that's when you get to a point before, you know, we celebrate Jackie Robinson, but we also killed him, pretty sure. So it's always the double-edged sword.
You get the last comment.
Yeah,
I think that all of these are great moments on the timeline, and each had their own incremental effect. But for me, I think what really made the difference was making the Negro Leagues palpable and tangible to baseball, to hardcore baseball fans. And that to me was based on the work that was done by the Negro League Committee of SABR, which basically led to the creation of a body of knowledge that then we were able to sink our teeth into. And that, I think, gave new life to a lot of research that became exciting to share with people.
Yes, seeing is believing, and then an exhibit helps. You know, having an actual exhibit with people, or having a ballpark that's been brought back to life, that helps too. All these are small things but there's something that fuels them, right? And that's what the kind of thing I want us to think about, not just right now, but over the weekend and the years to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you.